Welcome to the Not Just a Pony Ride podcast, presented to you by HETRA University. If you've landed here, you're probably passionate about how horses help people. Whether you're an instructor, therapist, in the business, or have experienced equine assisted services yourself, we're glad you're here. Join us as we talk about the benefits, the science, to-dos, how-tos, and all of the reasons why what we do is so much more than just a pony ride. And now, from the HETRA campus in Gretna, Nebraska, here's your host, occupational therapist Katie King.
Welcome back to the podcast you love for all things equine assisted services. Okay, guys, this is a big deal. I pinned down the always busy Shelby Winnail, and she is our equine operations manager here at HETRA. And I mean it, this gal is running all day, every day, trying to keep our horses, as she so eloquently says it, happy, healthy, sane, and sound. She is a hard lady to get on your schedule, so I'm thankful that she sat down with me today. We had a really interesting conversation about keeping our horses happy and injury-free and why exactly horses work so well for the type of work that we do. She knows, of course, all the good science-y stuff about horses because her degree is in equine science, and she literally grew up in the barn her entire life. She cares for HETRA's 25-ish horse herd and her herd at home as well. I think she's been showing horses since she could literally walk. So at this point, she knows what she's talking about, and it's all good stuff for your organization because, of course, after all, our mission is centered around horses, so we ought to keep them happy. So here she is. Enjoy. Shelby, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Thanks for having me, Katie.
Yeah. Okay, so the first thing I want to start with is you are the Equine Operations Manager.
Yes.
Tell me about what your job title is and what it all entails.
So my job keeps me pretty busy. I do everything involving our horses. So it goes from intake of new horses, and that entails, a whole host of things, communications with owners, going to look at the horses, kind of helping determine if that horse is going to be a good fit or not for our program. Then conditioning of our current horses to keep them in shape for their jobs, helping to develop conditioning and desensitizing programs for our new horses so that they can begin work in our program. Oh boy, it's a whole lot of stuff. I'm in charge of scheduling all veterinary care, farrier care, dentistry, discharge of horses when they're ready to retire or if they're not going to be a good fit for our program. Going back and if we have any horses that need to go back and do some more kind of desensitizing or different things to prepare them for new programs, helping to get them ready for that kind of stuff.
And you and your team does a lot of education type things with our volunteers, right? Like how to handle the horses and that type of thing. Yep.
So we do a lot of educating our volunteers on how to handle the horses, different horse personalities, how best to interact with, one horse versus another. And then really just helping them kind of start to develop their horse skills and really learn how to help communicate with each other and their horses.
Excellent. So let's kind of start from the beginning then, since you do all things horsey for HETRA. Tell me about selecting a good horse for our program or what types of qualities you look for when you're selecting horses for us.
Sure. So HETRA is in a pretty unique situation in that we have a lot of very qualified horse people on our staff that are able to help intake these horses and prepare these horses for their jobs as therapy horses. We're pretty fortunate in that in the recent years, we've been able to take in horses that are younger than a lot of people would be able to take into some therapy programs.
What's younger for us?
So younger for us is, we're looking anywhere from the 8 to 10, 12 range. I will say that I see a pretty significant difference in horses under the age of 16. It seems like we have some more their personalities are still a little bit more playful, it seems like. And so there's some different approaches that we have to take to get that horse prepared to move into the program. And then once they hit about 17, it seems like they're a little bit more settled in their own skin. They don't take quite as much processing time to get through training. and moving into working in our program.
Right. And we like our horses to have personality, right? I mean, they're allowed to have that, but it's just that developing that thinking brain, I think that is what we're looking for, right?
Absolutely. And obviously any horse that we bring into an equine assisted services program, we want to be quiet. We want them to not be a horse that's real spooky. There's a lot of things that we look for, but really our program, we're fortunate in that we have a wide variety of horses. So when I go to look at a horse, I'm really starting to look for horses that are going to fill a specific niche within our program. So maybe it's going to be a more kind of draft cross horse that can carry heavier riders, or maybe it's going to be kind of a pony cross that can help in our therapy services program a little bit more. So really kind of looking at those things. And we have a pretty good following in our community of people that reach out to us and ask if their horse would be appropriate for our program.
Are our horses primarily... Are they donated? Are they, purchased? Are they leased? What does that look like for HETRA?
So I would say HETRA's herd currently, we probably have about 2/3 of our horses are leased from their owners. And what that looks like is there's two different ways that we do horse leases. So most of our horses are on a care lease from their owners. Well, all of our horses are on a care lease, but most of them are horses that have been ready to retire from a previous career. And so they come to us on a care lease. HETRA takes care of them. When it is time for them to retire from our program, they are able to go home with their owners and live out their retirement with their owners. And, we know that that's a place that they are going to get well cared for and a place that loves them. So the second way we do leases here at HETRA is we enter into an agreement with volunteers that have expressed interest in owning horses, but maybe don't want to own a horse on their own, or they are so involved in HETRA they want to own a horse that's going to be part of our HETRA herd. So
that's super cool.
It is really, really, really cool, and it's allowed us to get some horses into our program that we probably wouldn't have been able to get just because of maybe their purchase price, or maybe they were out of state, and so we had to go out of state to purchase them. So it's been really a unique situation for us. And obviously we've been very thoughtful about who we enter into those agreements with, because we want to make sure that both parties are going to be, happy with the situation for the long haul. So we've done that with several of our volunteers, and it's worked out really well for us. And we typically do that on a 75-25% care fee. So HETRA pays 75% of that horse's care, and the owner then pays 25% of that horse's care. And it's worked out really well because, they want to come out maybe once, twice a week, ride their horse. We're able to use that horse in HETRA program and kind of help that volunteer find a horse, but also find a horse that's very selected into what we need for the HETRA herd.
And good for HETRA. Yeah,
absolutely.
So what types of horses do we have in our herd now that are a little bit different? I know we have a lot of, quarter horses and that type of thing, but we have a couple of interesting ones.
So we do. We have, like I said, we have a really diverse herd right now. We have one Rocky Mountain horse in our herd, which is the only Rocky Mountain horse we've ever had at HETRA. So he's really unique because Rocky Mountain horses are gated horses.
So crazy.
Yeah.
Don't mean to interrupt, but we did, and I'm excited to share it with our listeners here eventually, but we did a series of videos breaking down different types of movement in the horses. So, you can have a horse that's AP, anterior, posterior, kind of forward, back, lateral, side to side, concussion, rotational. You can have all kinds of different movements in horses. It's very, very interesting. It comes from their pelvis, but I had the pleasure of riding our Rocky Mountain bred horse, and you got him kind of into that gait that he has, and it's interesting the way that they move.
It really is. It's very smooth, but it's a quick-footed gait, and so it's a faster pace, but it's very, very smooth. The interesting thing about him is that he's really, really good at what he does. He's about 15 hands. He's pretty stocky. Super reliable. But even at his walk, he has very dramatic movement. And it's dramatic rotational movement of the pelvis. So you get exaggerated anterior posterior movement, but you also get exaggerated lateral movement.
It kind of feels like riding a hula hoop.
Yeah.
Sort of,
Yeah.
which sounds stupid, but it does really feel like that.
Yeah.
It's like the Macarena. Like it's like forward,
Yeah.
side. Like it's interesting.
It's really cool. And it's going back to horse selection and bringing horses into our program. It would not be productive for HETRA to have 20 horses that move like a Rocky Mountain horse moves,
Right.
because there is so much motion. He is a little bit more, we have to be a little bit more selective on the riders that are able to ride him, because we wouldn't want to put somebody on him that maybe has limited core or head control. That's going to provide them a lot of feedback. They're not probably going to be able to control their trunk enough to support themselves. There seems to be, kind of if you think about maybe your average 10-year-old child, people under that size have a hard time accommodating the movement, his movement. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think that just goes back to, smaller pelvis, not quite as toned muscles. So he's been a little bit more select in what we can see, but he's been really good.
I love that about our HETRA herd. And as an occupational therapist, I get to select a horse that matches the needs for my participant. Mm-hmm. And that's huge for me because I will have, in one given day, I will have a variety of participants, right? Maybe some that have a little bit lower muscle tone, and I would like a smoother gaited horse for that person. They don't have very good head control. I might have someone who's sensory seeking, who needs a lot of that movement to keep them engaged and keep them participating. So I might choose something like a gaited horse for that. So why is it that a horse's gait pattern works so well for what we do? And it has something to do with their pelvis formation, correct? And how that all works compared to a human pelvis, right?
Yep. And Katie, you can weigh in on this too, but so essentially what we know about the horse's pelvis and the human pelvis is that they work in the same planes of motion. So when I'm sitting on a horse, and my horse starts to walk forward, my body is going to get the input from that horse is going to provide my body with the same stimulation that my body would get when I'm walking. So if I'm working on strengthening my trunk and my core muscles so that I can stand up straight when I'm walking, sitting on a horse while a horse is walking is going to help activate those muscles
Same
and help
muscles,
strengthen those muscles. So that's part of why horses work as well as they do for the industry that we're in. And especially on the therapy services side of things, why horse selection is so important. Because if we have an individual that, maybe they really need to work on a left-sided weakness, we're going to want to make sure that the horse that they're on is very symmetrical, and definitely doesn't have any left-sided weakness of their own, to feed into that. It's one thing that's been really interesting, and I'm sure we'll talk about it at some point or on the Why Horses webinar, is there seems to be a little bit of correlation in how a human moves and how a horse moves and what that feedback when you put those two pieces together are. So I am a person, when I walk with a very anterior posterior pelvis rotation. When I am on a horse that provides anterior posterior movement up to me, it is very dramatic kind of movement that comes up through my body. But when I'm on a horse that provides lateral feedback, it's almost smooth moving
Balances
to me.
it out.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's been really interesting to see, and kind of watch play into how some of our therapists have chosen their horses. Because if I sometimes get a therapist that will come and say, hey, I need a horse that is going to provide my individual a lot of feedback. And so I have a handful of horses that, this is a lot of lateral feedback. This is rotational feedback. This is anterior posterior feedback. This is concussive feedback. This is very blended but dramatic feedback. So it's been really interesting to watch how those interact because, I might assign a horse has a lot of lateral feedback. And then in a couple weeks, that therapist will come back to me and say, Yeah, that's
No.
that's not working.
Yeah.
We're having trouble staying in the middle. And probably what's happening at that point is that the individual that horse is working with has also a lot of lateral feedback from their own pelvis. So when you put those two together,
It's like
that,
one side to the other side.
Yeah, that gets to be a really big side-to-side movement.
I can speak from experience on that. I've had a few participants you put on and you don't expect that lateral movement to be so dramatic, and you get them on and it's like, I can't keep this saddle in the middle and I don't know what's going on. My sidewalkers think my participant's falling off just because that lateral movement is so pronounced.
Yeah.
And I just got to say, I'm so thankful that we have somebody like you at HETRA, because I know enough to be dangerous with horses, right? Like I know enough to probably make an educated decision, but you went to school for equine science. You've been around horses your entire life. So you know these horses inside and out. You work with them every day. So for me to come to you and say, you know, Shelby, this is what I've got in my participant, you know, what can I get in a horse? What do we have that would match this and really maximize the therapeutic benefits for my participants? The other thing I'm thinking too is that not only is it my horse selection, like this is what I need in a horse, but also tack. I mean, honestly, the horse is important, you know, arguably the most important part of what we do, but the tack is, I mean, it's right up there with importance in horses, because if I need someone who has a lot of support, or need them to have a lot of support, I might put them in a Western saddle, you know, something with a big pommel, something that, you know, really gives them a lot of support. Or if they don't have a lot of flexibility in those hips, I need them to be in something a little narrower, maybe English saddle, something like that. I can go to you and say, not only is this the kind of horse I need, but this is the kind of tack I need. And does this recipe work out? You can say, no, it does not, or yes, it does.
Yeah. And if that is what that participant needs, I've got enough information on the tack and the horses and all the moving pieces that I can oftentimes help find a solution. So if, say, we have your participant needs a Western saddle and we don't currently have a Western saddle that fits that horse, there's a lot of times that I can kind of help go through and, you know, figure out how can we adapt an English saddle to provide more support, or, hey, we just got this new Western saddle in, let's try it and see, you know, is there a way we can shim something to make it work, so that we can make sure that participant gets exactly what they need for their maximum benefit.
Yeah, and it's super helpful because you're also an instructor. So you know, not only the horse part and the tack part, but the riding part, you know, and then I can bring the therapy side to it and we can kind of, you know, cocktail something to make it work. And it's great. It's really excellent. This episode is sponsored by Equiforce. Equiforce is a database that allows you to track every facet of your organization, from horse, donor, and volunteer management to scheduling, grant tracking, incident reports, and tracking participant progress too. This is not a one-size-fits-all setup. Instead, Equiforce personally works with you to learn how your facility functions and takes note of your specific terminology so that they can create a unique system to match the needs of your organization. And of course, Equiforce provides an ongoing training and support so that your database can grow with you. Visit them at www.equiforce.com. That's EQUI-FORCE.com. So tell me a little bit about, you know, we talked about all these moving parts, and I, you know, as therapists or instructors, we can select, you know, what kind of horse or tack or whatever. What does troubleshooting look like? What if, you know, we think we have the right plan and it just doesn't go right? Sure. You're there to help us troubleshoot, right?
Yep, absolutely. So kind of step one of troubleshooting at HETRA is, really first step one of troubleshooting is for that instructor or therapist to come to me and say, this is what's going on. And there's a lot of times I'm able to say, well, let's try this saddle or let's try this horse and see if this changes things. And we try not to change everything at once, because then, you know, we're not going to know what is the most successful. If we change the horse and the tack and the leaders and everything else all in the same week, we're not going to have a very good picture of what exactly changed that was successful. So a lot of times in step 1, we can kind of start to meander through some of those options and figure things out. If we still find that we're not being successful, a lot of times what the next step is that myself and then maybe one of our senior therapists will go down and observe the session and kind of put just a second set of eyes on. We have really, really great instructors and therapists at HETRA, but we all know that sometimes you work with a participant for so long and a second set of eyes gives you a fresh perspective.
Exactly what you need.
And it might be that I see something and, that you don't see in your lesson. And I'm able to say, hey, maybe try to have your sidewalkers do a different hold next week. And that might make all the difference.
Frequently, just as I'm thinking about this, frequently a problem I've been having is a lot of my participants have been inadvertently squeezing my horses with their legs and their feet. And when you're an instructor or a therapist, there's 1,000,000,007 moving parts. And so you're watching so much stuff that you don't notice those tiny little calf squeezes that they're doing here and there. And it's making their horse cue to go forward. And you're like, why is this happening? And until I had you come down and really observe my session, you're like, well, I think your participant might be cueing them. Oh my gosh. Yes, of course they are. So then I was able, to kind of correct that. So yeah, I agree. The second set of eyes is ideal.
And it makes a huge difference because like you said, when you're in the arena as an instructor or a therapist, you've got 5 million things that you're watching. And the thing of the utmost importance is your participant. And sometimes it's not always the horse that, I feel like we have a tendency to want to say, well, this horse is having this behavior in my lesson. And, then it's my job to come into the lesson and figure out why that horse is having that behavior. So whether it be walking off when they're supposed to be stopped or whether they're, maybe stepping 2 steps sideways every time we're stopping or things like that. And when I go in to kind of help troubleshoot and look at a lesson, the first thing that I'm watching is the horse. I'm watching that horse's behaviors, their expressions, how they're reacting to the people that are around them. And a lot of times it's a really simple fix. It's a really simple like, hey, your participant is squeezing your horse, or you've got a sidewalker that has gloves in their hoodie pocket and their gloves are bumping into the horse's flank when they're standing next to them, or, some things like that. It's a lot of times a pretty simple solution, but there are not often, but there are times that we come up with challenges that require a horse change or a tack change, or, we need to take that participant back to our equicizer for a few weeks and kind of address some of those things where we can be a little bit more hands-on. But yeah, that's kind of what troubleshooting would look like in a broad nutshell.
And I gotta say that what's helpful for me is that so HETRA has something called a horse note. And I have to do documentation on my participants every session. And I get to have the opportunity to contact you directly if I had a difficulty with a horse or something bizarre was happening, something strange. So for those of you listening, I can put in a note online. It gets emailed to Shelby, and it has a lot of information. So what happened? Who was leading the horse? Who were the sidewalkers? What tack did you use? What environmental things were going on? Was it hailing or snow sliding off the roof, or what was going on when this happened? So it has a lot of information in there that helps you kind of go back and decide, okay, is this a horse thing? Is this a person thing? Is it a participant thing? And it keeps us all on the same page.
Yeah. And it really helps me narrow down what might be our main challenge. So if I have gotten, and I'm just throwing names out here, if I've gotten 3 horse notes on Sally, our little pony, it's probably time that I need to look at Sally. If Sally is, maybe she's pinning her ears occasionally in a session, or she's not wanting to walk on like we'd like her to. It's probably time I need to look at Sally. Is Sally's back starting to get a little bit sore? Is Sally need to go be turned out for, a week and just be a horse? Is she getting a little bit burned out maybe? I probably need to look at Sally. If I get a horse note every week with our horse leader, Jimmy, I'm going to probably start looking at, is Jimmy being effective in his leading techniques? Is Jimmy, maybe he's pulling on our horse's head a little too much. Maybe Jimmy is coming into the barn with some energy that's not always congruent for our horses. So maybe I need to go back and I need to help educate Jimmy a little bit further on some handling techniques. Or it may be if I get 2 horse notes on Sally and both of them are with our W2 saddle, I know I need to go look at that saddle fit on Sally and make sure that saddle's not maybe pinching her somewhere. And if I get, and then if I'm getting the same horse report every week, so I'm getting a horse report only on Sally when she's working with Jimmy, then maybe I need to look at that dynamic. And maybe that's not the most positive dynamic that we could give for Sally and Jimmy. And there's some different things that we could try out. So that really helps kind of narrow down. Or if I get a horse report on Sally and she's spooked, but then I also find out that the wind knocked over a trash can and the trash can blew into the fence right behind her. We never want our horses to spook, but they're horses.
Yeah.
So that kind of gives me a little bit of a context of what that situation was. And, we're going to work on it with Sally and conditioning and make sure that she's desensitized to that kind of thing.
Or maybe make sure the doors are closed when it's windy.
Right.
Or, what kinds of other environmental factors can we control to keep our participants safe?
Exactly.
So I've heard a couple, and just in that, one, couple of scenarios there that you described, there's a couple of moving parts there I want to talk about. And one is what tack can fit properly or not properly. Right. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on with tack. And I know you do a great job. You and your team does a great job doing saddle fit for us quite frequently. And the other thing I want you to touch base on too is just how do you help develop our volunteers so that they can be successful leaders for our horses and our horses can be successful in their jobs with those leaders? Sure.
So 2 really loaded questions. So,
I know. Here, let me just give you ammunition for the next 3 hours. No.
I'm going to start with saddle fit. So the conditioning crew and I do saddle fit on our horses at HETRA quarterly. So this happens about every 4 months. We originally, when we started doing kind of more intense saddle fit, we were doing it about every 6 months, which was effective for us for a long amount of time. But we've gotten to the point where we have so many horses, we have so many saddles, that quarterly really seems to be a little bit more effective and a little bit more, it seems silly to say it's more time efficient because we're doing it more frequently, but it takes us less time when we do it quarterly than it does when we do it every 6 months. And when we do saddle fit, basically what we do is we saddle fit every single saddle on every single horse. And there's a few exceptions where I know I've got a couple horses that maybe they're very narrow. I'm not going to spend time putting our widest, our saddles with the draft tree. I'm not going to put those on those horses because we know it's not going to fit. But that's essentially what it is. We go through, we put every saddle on every horse. We mark what fits. We mark what doesn't fit. We mark what needs shimmed. We mark what's changed from the last time we did saddle fit. And then we go through and we update our scheduling boards. So we go through and we look at every day of the week that we have sessions and we look at every horse that's on that board, what saddle they're using. We update that. And then we post an updated chart to our volunteer hub area so that our volunteers and our instructors and therapists that are working at sessions every day are able to look at that information if they need to make a saddle change. So
I love that board, I gotta say, because if I have a new participant or a participant that I need to do, like something wild happens, I don't know, I need to do a tack change real quick. Mm-hmm. I go to that board, you kind of, X, Y axis it or whatever, and it says, Sally can only wear Western 3 and English 2. And you're like, okay, well, guess those are the 2 that I have to choose from. And you can safely assume that Sally will be happy in those 2 saddles and I don't have to worry about it. I don't just pull something off the rack and think, well, hope this doesn't make her back sore. Right. Because you and your team have gone through and really looked at that.
And it really takes the guesswork out of it for our instructors and therapists, which our instructors and therapists are busy when they're in the barn. Their job is a million miles an hour. So I really don't want them having to try to figure out if this stuff is working or not. And so that really takes the guesswork out of it for them.
And that's when inadvertent accidents can happen.
Exactly.
And for us at HETRA, safety is number one always.
Yep.
And so anything we can do to make our lives easier and more safe for us and our horses and our participants is good.
And I like to say for our HETRA horses that we want them to be happy, healthy, sane, and sound. It's just important to us. Like Katie said, it's all about safety. And if our horses aren't happy doing their jobs, if they're not healthy doing their jobs, obviously if they're not sane and if they're not sound, whether that be sound of hoof or sound of back, they're not going to be safe in their jobs, because an unhappy or a hurting horse is a dangerous horse and an unpredictable horse. And we can't have that in this industry.
And I just believe that we as an organization honestly, you do such a great job keeping our horses on the ready, because, and they may be a little older, but we've got horses working, far into their older years because we keep them conditioned and we keep them ready.
Yep.
And I know that you and your team do, 3 times a week, we do conditioning, especially for our horses, to keep them ready and keep them, exercised and strong for their jobs.
Yep. So every horse in our HETRA herd has a personalized conditioning program that really focuses on what are their strengths and what are their challenges. And I'm going to help develop that for the team to work through. How can we best help this horse be in their peak physical form? So we know when we have a horse that's 22, they're not in their peak prime of their life, but there are things that we can do to help that horse stay comfortable doing their job. So
I love this. What's the analogy you use about running a mile?
Running a mile.
Because I absolutely hate running.
It is.
So when Shelby uses this analogy, I love it. What is it?
It is. So if you asked me, I hate running also, and I don't do it. If you see me running, you should run too, probably. So if you asked me tomorrow to go out for my job and run a mile, I would probably do it, but I would be really cranky. I would be out of breath. My muscles would be sore. Would I be able to go out and run a mile a second day in a row? Probably not.
Because I'm not going to like you very much if you're the one that told me to do it.
I'm not going to like you, and my muscles are going to hurt. My body's going to hurt. But if, even if I've been running half a mile or 3/4 of a mile every day or 3 or 4 times a week, and then you ask me to go run a mile, sure, it's going to be a challenge, but my body is going to be physically able to do that. It's the same thing with our horses. So, every day that our horses come to work, is that going to be their hardest day on the job? Probably not, but it might be. It might be their hardest day on the job. They might have a participant that is just wiggly today, or they might have a participant that's, maybe they're sitting heavy off to one side. They have a participant that has upped their level of skills and they're working on trot canter transitions or walk canter transitions, which are even harder. So we really want our horses to be as physically fit as they can be to do their jobs, because then they're going to be happier doing it. If they can physically comfortably do their jobs, they're going to be happy to come to work and they're not going to be cranky about it. And that's really important for us here.
So what other things? I think when people think about, I condition my horses, I lunge them, right? I lunge my horses, or we hand walk the ones that don't lunge or that kind of thing. But what other things do our horses do to keep them ready?
We have an arsenal of tools that we can use to help condition our horses, and that we can use to help condition older horses, which is what we see a lot in our industry, is that these horses are a little bit they've got some age to them. And it's not always going to be the most successful to take that horse out and hack them through the fields and jump over all the down branches, because guess what? Now you just ask them to run a mile and they're not comfortable running a mile and they're not going to like you. So we really need to be able to look at that horse as an individual and identify out what are the pieces that need to be conditioned. And we've got, like I said, tons of different things we can do with them. We even as far as hand walking up and down hills, we can hand walk over cavalettis. We can lunge over cavalettis. We can lunge on a slight incline. We can long line our horses. We use a tool called an Equiforce. And that is it's kind of like a saddle pad. We generally put it underneath of a surcingle when we're long lining, or we'll do it when we lunge sometimes. And it has therabands that runs underneath of the horse's belly and then behind the horse's back legs. And really it's a proprioceptive tool for that horse to lift their belly, lift that back, engage the hind end up underneath of themselves. I use that tool a lot with some of our older guys that it doesn't make sense to add another riding time to them 3 times a week. It just doesn't. They're already, they don't need me to be riding them and, conditioning them that way. They really need to just be physically holding themselves where they are. And so that's a really great tool.
So I think that's something we so often think is, these horses are being ridden. I mean, they're in sessions, they're being ridden 3, 4, whatever time, however many times a week it is. But really, I mean, getting down to things like the Equicore or even like massage or things like that, like that's what they really need to keep them holistically
absolutely
happy, healthy, sane, and sound, right?
Absolutely. We do a lot of body work, a lot of stretching, carrot stretches, balance boards. The Windy Murdoch has some balance boards that we use. We do all kinds of that kind of, we have a beamer that we use on our horses for PEMF therapy. We have, all kinds of different things that we use to keep our horses healthy in their jobs and ready to come to work tomorrow.
And that's important. They're the center of our mission. Yep. And if they're not in the best, the best that they can be, then we're not starting with a whole lot, as a foundation for us. So it's important.
And I think I'm going to tag on to the end of that. I think that's important to take into consideration as we bring new horses into our programs is, we have horses in our program that have been with us for 12, 14, 15 years. And obviously that horse was a lot more physically capable 12 years ago.
And mentally. Some of that therapy work is cognitively taxing for those horses to go through.
It really is. So it's really important to accept the horse's changing body over the years, but not to be totally complacent to it. So there's things that we can do to help them stay physically fit. But at the same time, are they going to be able to see the caseload that they saw 10 years ago? Probably not. So it's really important to adapt to that. But then as an organization, it's important for us to acknowledge those changes and know that when we bring horses in to our program, depending on that horse's physical fitness, age, ability, we're going to have to be cognizant of that as we move forward with that horse's process into the program. So if I bring one in that's 20, that process is going to look a little bit different than if we bring one in that's 8. So it's just important to kind of keep those things in the back of your mind and know that not every horse that comes into your program is going to have a successful approach if we use the exact same approach with every single horse to get them ready to go for programming.
Right. And there is, that's a thing that happens. We get horses that are with us for a very long time. Honestly, longer than, I say most programs, but, you kind of have a number in your head that it just gets to be a long job for them. But we're able to keep horses longer because of the things that we do for them to keep them happy. But what happens when a horse does just get a little bit tired and they're ready for retirement or signs of burnout, even they're not happy in their job anymore?
Sure. So we really do. We really try to combat burnout as much as we possibly can. And we've got some really great webinars on the HETRA University page about equine burnout and about conditioning the older equine services horse and how we can help that. And those, really, honestly, the biggest thing comes back to the horse being physically able to do their job. And then the second thing is we've recently started to implement, probably in the last 5 years, sabbaticals for our horses. So we have built into our schedule every quarter, we have 1 week where we are just off of programming. And we don't do conditioning that week. We don't do any programming that week. All all that happens that week is that those horses go outside and they get to be horses. They get to stay outside. They get to play with their friends. They get to just relax. And physically,
I love that.
Yeah.
Like as humans, we get PTO.
Yeah.
And that keeps us sane. So why don't horses get the
and
same
they're
thing?
as much of a part of our team as the humans on our team are. So it's really important that we give those horses the opportunity to be successful. And I can tell you from experience, when we started implementing that kind of PTO for our horses, we've seen a huge change in these horses, both physically and mentally. Physically, we have less back soreness. We have less lamenesses. We have mentally, we have less quote unquote cranky horses. These horses they're just happier doing their jobs. They've gotten some time off. I mean, think about you personally, how much happy you are to go to work when you get back from vacation than when the week before you leave for vacation.
Even a weekend. I mean, we get weekends, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Monday, you get to Friday and then you're like, oh, and you nap all day Saturday or whatever you do. And then you come back to work Monday, you feel re-energized. And I think for a lot of our horses, they're working a lot. I mean, they're working weekend lessons and they're working weekday lessons. And you don't think about it until you have someone that's tracking that.
Yep.
Wow, these horses are working a lot.
And that is something that I try to do for our horses here at HETRA, is that I really try not to schedule. We only run programming 6 days a week. We occasionally run a 7th day a week, but only ground programming. I try to not schedule these horses to work 6 days a week. I really try to give them if I can, 2 days off a week where they don't have to do anything. They can just go outside and they can be a horse. And that's made a huge difference for our herd once we started doing that. They're just happier. They just enjoy their jobs more. They like being around the people more. They're just happier.
I agree. So we're getting close on time here, Miss Shelby. I always close my podcast with the same question. So you get to choose. Either I know that you have been a horsewoman for your entire life. So you can tell me about your heart horse, or you can tell me about your spirit animal and why.
So I've been prepping for this question.
This ought to be good.
I've had a lot of heart horses in my life, and I've been truly blessed because most people only come across one heart horse in their entire life. Personally, I've had 3 horses that really I would consider my heart horses, and they have all come into my life at really appropriate times. So when I was younger, I had a horse, and his name was Odie, and he was actually my aunt's horse. So thank you, Aunt Beth, for borrowing him to me. He was just a saint, and he was also a HETRA horse.
Wait a minute. Was Odie your mom's heart horse in our first podcast?
Probably.
Y'all, if you're listening to this, you got to go listen to podcast 1 because Edie also had Odie as her heart horse. Interesting. Okay.
Yep. So Odie, this horse was just, he was worth his weight in gold. And when we were showing, we do a lot of showing with our personal horses. I'm a little bit of a free spirit. And I was probably, 6 or 7 and going into these classes with the big kids. And, I'm wanting Odie to canter because the judge said canter. And I want to canter down this rail. And Odie just kind of plods along, walking along or jogging along, doing his job.
Taking care of little Shelby.
Yep, taking care of me. And then pretty soon, the hindsight being, there's a horse that's bucking up ahead or, there's some sort of wreck, and Odie was just kind of keeping me out of it. So at the time, I would get frustrated with Odie because, like I said, I have opinions about what I want to do. But hindsight, he really kept me very safe along the way. I've got another horse, Dexter, who I would say was my heart horse when I was a teenager. And he's gigantic. He's probably close to 17 too. Huge. Sweetie. He's a huge sweetheart and a goober. This horse is just, if you think about the goofiest gelding you've ever known in your entire life, that was this horse. He just is always into something. I can't tell you how many jackets he broke because he'd grab my zipper and try to play with it, and he'd end up pulling my zipper off.
I feel like this is like so great and also kind of ironic that he was your teenage heart horse, because weren't we all goobers at like teenage? Like we're all making strange decisions when we're teenagers.
Right.
So
he really, and I went on and accomplished a lot of really, really cool things with him, won a lot of awards with him that were just really special things to do as a teenager. And kind of drove my passion for this industry and why horses are so important for us. So
very cool. Well, thank you so much, Shelby, for joining us. You have absolute wealth of knowledge, and Shelby has done, just so you guys know, several webinars for us on, how the HETRA leads our horses. We're going to have her back on again to talk about some of that stuff, but what kinds of things we do to help educate our volunteers to keep our horses happy, as well as like preventing equine burnout and conditioning the therapy horse, selecting the therapy horse, all kinds of stuff. So if you're interested in more from her, which I would highly recommend, you can find that on HETRAuniversity.org. And anything else you want to say to our listeners, Shelby, before you go?
I don't think so. Thanks for listening, and thanks, Katie, for having me, and look forward to coming back.
This podcast is presented by HETRA University, an educational arm of the Heartland Equine Therapeutic Riding Academy. HETRA University's mission is to provide high-quality educational offerings to our participants and the equine assisted services community. Craving more content like this? We invite you to check out our series of webinars and much, much more over at HETRAuniversity.org. If you'd like to help us work toward our mission, you can make a donation by clicking on the link in the show notes below or visit us at HETRA.org. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Again, my biggest thanks to you all for helping HETRA change lives one stride at a time.